Hello, this is David Hughes with another video for Genealogy Basics. This is material that we're unable to cover in class, so I'm putting in video for your convenience. What we're going to cover is care in using our online sources. In talking about that, I am going to cover some handwriting analysis examples, and then finally end with some final genealogical advice. So, when you're working online, you need to be aware that certain actions that you take inside of the repositories will help teach the repository how to find records for other people. So these are particularly the sites that have hints, give hints off of your trees. And by accepting or rejecting those hints, you are helping this search engine. So that has pluses and minuses. So the plus is that if you're doing a good job, other people are going to benefit from your research and then find these records. The downside is that if you accept a hint for a record and it actually doesn't belong to your ancestor that you incorrectly connected, you then skew the search results, and other people might be led down the same bad path. So just be careful. You know, what I do, I use the hints to see what records it thinks, but then I back out. I never accept or reject any of the hints. So I actually have a huge list of hints for all my ancestors. But what I then do is do a brand new search all the way back to the top menu and start. Maybe I use the database that it used, the collection that this record belonged to, and then search within and I find that record again. But I do it by manual search, and in that way, it doesn't know to connect it to anybody in my tree. So I then take the results of my searching and then manually connect to my tree. I don't influence the search engine that way, but also if I do something wrong or go down a wrong path, nobody else has that problem. I mean, one of the obvious examples I have is that I had done search for a Frederick Beeler, Fred Beeler, and because there was a junior and senior and they lived close to each other, they were on the same page. And the search hints uh, recommended the wrong one of those two as a result to follow. So thank goodness I didn't accept it. And I then worked at a record source independent. So um, So, in your searching, you're going to find that these online records occasionally have mistakes. They can be typos. Most likely, they're transcription errors. You know, the person that um, was reading, like the census, uh, looked at the handwriting and put the incorrect interpretation of the handwriting into the computer. Um, and then especially around newspapers, it is the computer has incorrectly interpreted the text in the scan that they're turning from um, electric to or image to characters. So we'll talk about that more when we talk about newspapers. But those are the most common, and those things, those type of things, yes, most of the repositories give options on how to correct that record so that somebody else can find that record if you found it. So, but here's the downside: uh, if you submit a correction, I've never found a way to remove it. So once it's in there, it's forever, it seems. And if you are wrong, it could mislead others to search the wrong person. And I'm going to go through an example of this. Um, so here's the first example. This is an example of an incorrect transcription, and we're going to look at what was transcribed as Maud, spelled Maude, middle initial O, Bunny. Now, if you want to look at this on your own and make your own interpretation, uh, you can stop the video right now and maybe look at the sheet here and do some handwriting analysis and see if that person uh, correctly transcribed. So just pause it and then come back in. I'm going to hit an explanation. So when you zoom in on this, look at mod O, and we're going to look at the middle initial first. You look around the page and look at Indiana and Iowa, but also Ohio, an O leading, capital O. You have lots of examples here on the page. Um, Mod, this middle initial, is actually closer to an I, and in no way looks like one of the O's that this enumerator writes. You would have seen something up here probably for the O, but this person just has a very open, extremely open I. And, that is clearly that character, that middle initial O that was transcribed as O, is closer to looking like the I written all over the page by the enumerator. So that's just some real simple handwriting analysis to make sure interpretation. In this case, this was transcribed wrong. We've done the handwriting analysis. Now, the people who are doing the indexing are trying to get through so much that they can't stop at every single name and do this analysis. But you can correct and put it into the system. So if somebody else searches for mod, they'll get the right person. Now, look at the E after mod. You have to really look at everything around here. And what you can see is that the enumerator does some markings to do their counts. And you see even on the U, there's, it looks like a number 1 on there. And this looks like a number 8 with a huge tail. And if you really look at it, it doesn't. It's two different handwritings. And there is no E at the end of mod, M-A-U-D. And if you look back here at the record, you can see that there's a number, 1-7, something 7. I don't know if that's page 7, page 3, page 5, page 2. I'm not sure what it is that they're writing, but it clearly, this looks like something 8, and that is not E on mod. So again, let's acknowledge that the people who index these records had a huge task ahead, and they made their best effort, and they should be applauded for that. But I went ahead and corrected this in Family Search to make sure that somebody else who's looking for mod got the mod and I in there. Now let's look at the other example. This is an example where I found somebody else had input a correction, and the corrections show up, for instance, in the Family Search down in the area underneath where you can see the names that were written up there, or in the actual record detail. It will be in brackets. That is a corrected name. So what you'll have is the original transcription, and then in brackets somebody else's correction. And somebody said that this should have been Fred Beckler. So you can imagine somebody out there is searching for a relative, saw this and said, "This is Fred Beckler." Um, no, it isn't. So we'll look at it, and clearly, again, we're going to use the writing that's available in front of you here. If you want to do it yourself, um, stop the video here and do that. But I'm going to go on and show you the handwriting analysis. So the question is whether BOEH, or that section could be um, BECK, instead of BOEH. And I guess if you squint, you could, project that it's that. But we have other examples right here of letters and a CK right nearby, uh, that were written up by the enumerator. And right here, here's Frederick and Fred. And you can see in both these cases, the person who writes a vowel or letter and it goes into a C lifts their pen. Here it's cleanly lifted. Here, maybe it's just a light thing, but then CK. You don't see anything like this. And their Ks, you can see here, this loop leans forward. There's no forward-looking loop here. So, you know, doing this analysis here, I don't see how the CK could have been pulled out. But sorry. Um, Therefore, that EH is not a CK and is not a transcription error. And the problem is now that you have this correction, incorrect correction. I did a search on Fred Beeler or Frederick Beeler in the 1920 U.S. Census, which this record is from, and now this census page comes up as one of 20 in the country Becklers. I mean, I just anyway, I find it irresponsible that somebody made that correction here, and now it's messed up and could mislead people who don't take the time to do this handwriting analysis. Uh, One other note here is you only correct what looks like an error. So I don't have it here, but in another video about more effective research, we find uh, an entry in the census for Sarah Bunny, but it's in the census spelled SORE, and there is that is what the enumerator wrote into the census. In my opinion, you do not change that. You do not correct that and put in Sarah. It clearly says SORE. And the reason why you need to not correct it is that that is what the record says. And we fix typos, we fix transcription errors, but we do not correct records that say one thing and make it say something different. It's a subtle thing. I think one important reason is that genealogists need to look at this record and make sure they feel like this is a proper record. So, in my opinion, you do not correct anything that the record just has. For instance, instead of Sarah, it's SORE, SORE. I wouldn't correct that. But anyway, okay, so I'm going to hit some final genealogical advice. And these are just some quick hitters here and some examples of why to follow this advice. First of all, straight from X Files is trust no one. Don't assume just because somebody has put it up on the internet that it's true. Just because somebody has written put together a tree, don't assume it's true. Check everything and verify for yourself. I mean, if you find somebody that um, you've looked at lots of their work and they've had a track record of, hitting everything on the mark, I would still use their work carefully, but um, I wouldn't just copy it still. I would look at all their sources, uh, really listen to what their justification is for why they think the source proves their point. In Family Search, there's an area where you can put in the information why you think a certain record belongs there or proves the fact. So unless you carefully review the people's citations and review their sources and agree with their conclusions, you shouldn't use it. But again, if you're doing all that, you're not trusting them anyway. So, bottom line, trust no one. And here's an example, even in my own work, where one of my relatives had paid a researcher in England to do some work for them. And this one's around Betsy Livesey, which I talked in another video about the Betsy Livesey marrying John Falk. Betsy was born in 1845 or 1846, and we have a photograph where someone in the family wrote on the back that she was born in Blackburn, England. So, that might not be available to the researcher, but the researcher did some work. Here's the, in the middle here is the marriage license or marriage record, excuse me, not a license, but a marriage record that John Falk married Betsy Livesey. And if you go over here, that the father's name was John Livesey and he was a servant. So, uh, so the researcher, the genealogist who did this work, had also given this information that in 1861, John Livesey of Snaith was enumerated working in the London area. And by the way, this Clapham of Surrey, the county of Surrey, is adjacent to London, or part of the London area. And John Livesey was working for John Jenkinson in 1861, married. And in 1881, John Livesey is enumerated as married, working as butler and for Emily Johnson. And this was not uncommon, is that the enumerations had servants at the residences of the head of household, and they were enumerated there. So these two censuses I did pull up and verify that these two did exist, but it doesn't jive that they're from Snaith, or this John Livesey was from Snaith. And here I had notes about Betsy being from Blackburn. So I dug deeper beyond what the genealogist provided. So I went back to 1861 and found John Livesey of Snaith. But in 1851, and remember, Betsy was born in 1845 or 6, he was unmarried. So that's a strike against this John Snaith. I also found it peculiar that in 1871, either now this was done before all the computers and everything else. So, this genealogist probably went down to the archives in England. But in the 1871 census, I did find in the John Snaith in the census, and the John Livesey of Snaith was not enumerated in a head of household as a servant at the time. He was, he might have been working for somebody, and he listed his occupation as butler, but he was head of household with the wife being Deborah Livesey. Okay, so no surprise that Deborah Livesey didn't have any daughter, Betsy, because Betsy's married by 1870, but 1871. So this, though, gives us the name of the wife of John's Livesey. And if he was married in 1861, Deborah out there must exist. And we took a look and found that the wife of the servant, um, uh, here is the wife of a manservant, has children, but no children named Betsy or Elizabeth. And in 1861, that would have been that she was 15 or 16. She would have been at home with her mother. So where is Betsy? So everything is looking like this John Livesey is the wrong John Livesey and is not the father of Betsy Livesey. At least at a minimum, it's going to require a lot more research, and that this genealogist just didn't pull everything together and do enough digging to make sure that this is the correct John Livesey. So anyway, this is one of my areas to do a lot more work. Unfortunately, in Blackburn, all just within a 3 month period, there was in 1845 or so, there was 20 different children born as Betty, Betsy, Elizabeth, some combination in just 3 months. So there was an area of a lot of Liveseys and a lot of children uh, with Betty or Betsy or Elizabeth name. So anyway, that's one of my brick walls. So another is a bit of advice here is don't make assumptions. Review all the data before you discount a source. Maybe it's actually giving you some clues. And here's my example of me where I made assumptions and missed the record for a long time here. So John Falk, again, we're talking about John Falk, who was born in 1840 to 1845 in England. I could not find, continued to be unable to find a birth or baptismal record for this period of time. And all my searches, I get these records. And one of the things in my broader searches was an 1866 baptismal record. I looked at this baptismal record, this 1866 baptismal record came up in search, the broad search results times. I passed right by it. I said 1866 can't be my John Falk. But I finally started opening up these records, and lo and behold, we look at this baptismal record. And if you look at it carefully, even though it was in 1866, I didn't see this before, is over here that this was for an adult. So if you look at all the surrounding records, you don't see this notation except in this one. And it turns out John Falk was a mechanic, and often that the term engineer was used. So this is referring to John Falk, the engineer, and not the not the parents. This might even be the address of John Falk at the time. He would be 21, or maybe he's still living with his parents. That would something to be checked out. But then these are the parents' names. So this most likely is the John Falk that we're working on. But this would be a hint to research Henry and Mary Ann as the parents for John Falk. It's a lead that we could then put together the evidence to prove this. But yeah, through my assumptions, I missed this record totally. So, uh, yeah, don't make assumptions. And, uh, records will be where you find unexpectedly. So that's what I got. And I look forward to talking to you in the next session. Thank you.